Good. Okay, well, assuming that you can hear me, do apologize for being online and not being able to be there in person today. I titled my presentation Fellowships, Failure and Fortune, although obviously the previous speakers have done a fantastic job in highlighting some of the pitfalls and challenges associated with the fellowship path. However, I think there is a huge amount of fortune at the end of this as well, in terms of it's a real opportunity to develop yourself. And when we always hear about what would you like to be doing in 5 years' time, this really gives you a blank canvas for what you are able to actually do with your life and your career and what you're really passionate about. So take all of the things that we've been speaking about today, but also recognize that this is a very lucrative, fantastic opportunity to follow through with the opportunities that you could be presented with. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Tom Johnson. I started as a lecturer just this year after getting rejected from a fellowship, so I'll touch upon that. But I've spent my whole career at UCL Biochemical Engineering, which I think is a good thing. But when we saw Tom's circle earlier showing the tube map, mine would be more like a pinpoint. I've gone all the way from undergraduate all the way through to PhD, postdoc, and also as part of my fellowship that I performed in the department. In this talk today, a lot of great points have already been made, but I'm going to speak about the motivation for pursuing the fellowship journey, and then also how this happened for my own research career to date as well. And obviously not everything that I'm going to say is going to be applicable to everyone. What I'd like you to do is consider the things that I'm saying and then maybe apply it to your own research or to your own interests and activities and how this could help you. I'll then also have some advice, although we've already seen some great ideas, before making concluding comments. And we've heard a lot about feedback already from the previous speakers, and I fully agree. However, something that's very important as we go throughout this is not only receiving feedback from others, but also reflecting upon ourselves as well. I think this is a very powerful tool that perhaps everybody doesn't do enough of. And I'm going to maybe walk you through my motivations and my thoughts as to how I got towards my fellowship journey. Because if we're talking about a fellowship process, it's going to take you, let's say, a year to apply, and then the whole thing's going to be 3 to 5 years. You've got to be doing something. Not only do you think that it's going to be impactful and valuable to the department or to the funders, but it also must be impactful and valuable to your interests as well. You don't want to write something to do for the next 5 years that you actually end up hating. So this gives you, again, a blank canvas for you to operate and for you to really thrive in an environment that you're able to create and nurture. Obviously, we start off with our inherent interests in life, and everybody's different. I'm going to start off my research journey, I'd say, in 2013, when I took an internship in iGEM, which is synthetic biology within the department. And this also formed my master's research project. And this taught me various things, maybe about myself, that without the experiences I wouldn't know. And I've been able to use that, to this very day. I firstly found out that I really enjoyed being in the lab and, doing a lot of that work, which is obviously very helpful when we're talking about research fellowships. But the lab-based environment was something that I really enjoyed. I also enjoyed, as part of iGEM, working with others in a more of a camaraderie sense rather than a direct collaborative work. I like doing my own research experiments, but I really liked working with others in a broader sense. And that was a lesson I didn't necessarily realize at the time, but became more apparent as I progressed forward. So I wanted to be doing my work, but linking it with others as much as possible. And again, some of that may be similar for you, some of that may be dissimilar for some of you, and that's absolutely fine. But it's just recognizing our research habits and our inherent interests. I also found that maybe synthetic biology wasn't for me. I did enjoy the work that I was doing, but given my other studies in biochemical engineering, I was probably more interested in unit operations within the bioprocess rather than, let's say, the synthetic biology side. So that pushed me in my PhD direction to apply for things that are going to be more related to unit operations. So I ended up being accepted for a PhD in chromatography, which has both physical and chemical sides. So I'd still have some of that expertise that I built up in the synthetic biology aspects to apply to this PhD research project. I'd also been doing some new things which really stood out to me as I was applying. Particularly, this project focused on using imaging techniques to understand chromatography materials. And imaging isn't something I'd really necessarily thought about. I'm certainly not a keen photographer or anything like that in my spare time, but this really stood out when I was applying to this project. There was an inherent interest. And I had a range of different techniques that I was using, and I found that some that I didn't enjoy so much. So focused ion beam, which is at the bottom image on the third column, even though I did a lot of it throughout my PhD and I published on it, it was a technique I didn't really enjoy so much. But the area I loved the most was X-ray imaging, which is something to this day has really become the cornerstone. It wasn't necessarily going to be the main focus of the PhD project, but then as I progressed, this is something that became more and more important because that's what I found really interesting. That's what I could get up early in the morning and stay late in the night to do these experiments for. And I found during my PhD, running life cycle, and analyzing all the chromatograms became less and less interesting. So I'd again been able to identify things I was more interested in upon reflecting upon my PhD and areas that I was less interested in. So could I see myself doing focused ion beam for the rest of time? No. So I very quickly dropped that technique. And then I wanted to deepen my expertise in the X-ray side. So whether I was going to go into industry or whether I was going to stay in academia, this is an area that I really wanted to focus in on. And so my postdoctoral work focused on that technique and really deepening the understanding of how we can relate the structure of downstream processing materials, broadening my horizons, to function and performance. And all of that information led me to then applying to the fellowships, which I started in 2021 through MRC, to use all of that information that I gathered in order to inform the design of new materials, also allowing me to move into newer areas which I had previously hadn't had too much exposure with, 3D printing being a good example of this, which I'll touch upon later. Additionally, as well as highlighting my inherent strengths and also my inherent areas of interest, it's also important to highlight areas where where perhaps areas of weakness or areas which have been underdeveloped. And Emily already did a great job in going through some of these aspects in terms of there's a lot of opportunities out there. And I'd found that even though I had a good publication track record, I perhaps didn't have a great conference track record. And so as part of my fellowship, I wanted to achieve two things on top of, let's say, the research goals. One, I wanted to go to a lot more conferences, and in doing so, build a network. And also, I wanted to then make some of those networks into meaningful collaborations. So a lot of my fellowship budget that I designed in was less so on, let's say, the experimental side, because all of the equipment already existed. And then I used an approach similar to how we heard previously about top-up grants, small travel grants or small equipment user grants to access those. And most of the money went into building a network in terms of my funding that I produced. And this was very important, gathering all of these skills so that you're continuously developing yourself. And as already has been highlighted, it's about developing your skills and you as a person and you as a future leader, not just the experiments that you're doing in the lab. To quickly touch upon the research journey and maybe give a bit more context, my project or PhD project was focused on understanding the structural chromatographic materials, which currently a lot of the performance-based metrics such as ATP and other things are based upon equation-based derivations. So this work, for the first time, we're able to actually understand what the structure of these materials looks like, both in a static sense across all of these different length scales from a whole column to a nanopore and everything in between, but also how they behave as we change. And so I wasn't necessarily thinking about this as the time during the PhD, but really trying to think about the narrative that you're creating throughout your career, linking back to the trajectory that Emily spoke about, is going to be very, very important. And then in the postdoctoral time, it was very important to, in my opinion, to do three things. You have to deepen your research expertise, really become a world leader in, let's say, a particular technique. I think is very valuable. Doing something that nobody else can necessarily do. You need to broaden your horizons, which naturally will happen as you move from project to project and you'll be doing different things. For example, in my case, I went from chromatography to, let's say, all of the downstream processing unit operations and also some adherent upstream materials as well. And finally, we need to also be adding a lot of value to what we're currently doing. And I know you're all going to be very busy doing the current job that you're doing, but thinking about what really interests you that you could do beyond what your current job description is. For me, I really love the teaching, and also mentorship. So as part of the Centre of Excellence within the department, I did a lot of mentorship for PhD students and also expanded to postdoctoral researchers. And I took up far more teaching responsibility than I was actually contractually required to do. Another area which I think is really, really important, everybody should be really thinking about this, is getting involved in supervising, let's say, students within the department. For example, there's lots of master's projects that run. That gives you the opportunity to start writing a small research proposal, which can then give you some of the skills required then to write fellowship applications. It also then adds to these sections that Emily spoke about in terms of supervision and various other areas. And that's been very meaningful. It's not just an exercise in itself. It led to me then designing PhD projects, which I currently then supervise, Kwan and Hercules on the screen. In terms of my fellowship, which started in 2021, I then again wanted to further deepen my skills, but also broaden my horizons. My research career reads UCL, 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 UCL. So then this fellowship would allow me to go and work with lots of world leaders in other areas. And then I'd be able to then not only benefit them through collaboration, but bring those skills into the department, which again, I've done through Aprilia, who I supervise with Marco and Dan. In this case, Edinburgh lead in 3D printing chromatography columns. We're able to then combine 3D design, 3D printing with 3D imaging and analysis and create a design cycle loop, which benefited both parties. And one of the most important factors I spoke about earlier is developing this network. And the fellowship not only allowed me to go to a lot of conferences, meet all of these people in person, but I was able to have the freedom to, and also the budget, importantly, to go and then spend a month or two at some of these world leading labs, particularly in the United States, and then bring those collaborations back to UCL. Something I'd observed at conferences is that a lot of the academics were very well versed with each other at UCL across the pond, but hadn't really collaborated too much together. What I've been able to do through my fellowship is create these collaborations and then bring their research expertise and their collaborations to other people within the department as well. And I think that's actually was a good contributor as to why I actually got the lectureship position in the end here, is that I was able to bring something that if I'd just stayed at UCL during my fellowship, I wouldn't have been able to contribute. Going back to Martina's point, I have applied to Royal Academy of Engineering. I've been rejected from the Royal Academy of Engineering. I found the internal process was actually tougher than the external process, although I got through the internal. I didn't get the external in terms of the funding in the end. I've applied to EPSAC Open, I've applied to FLF, didn't get any of those. I couldn't find all of the emails. Perhaps for my own ego's sake, it might be a good thing. As Tom highlighted, you get a lot of feedback from these as well. And it's not only using that feedback, but also combining that with your own reflection, which I think is very valuable. And again, my fellowship that I applied to in 2023 and got rejected in 2024 formed the basis as I evolved it and improved it as part of when I applied for academic positions. But sometimes these things ultimately pay off. This is the email that I could find with essentially the offer letter for the department for this fellowship. And again, this really transformed my career and is a big contributor as to why I'm still here today, albeit not in person. The advice has already been covered to a much greater degree than what I've got on my slides here, so I won't say too much beyond the postdoc is a real opportunity to transform yourself from a PhD researcher being really good at a few certain things into a leader in research. And it's really important to think about why are you doing this and what are you trying to achieve. Help is always on hand is my final point here, in that there's always going to be people such as myself, the other speakers, also your cohort and your peers going for coffee, is really fantastic to share ideas as to how you're going through things, and also sharing stories of success and also not success is very useful. I know when Emily was going through her processes, she was hugely helpful to me, not just in terms of how you go about applying, but also what was the state of mind as well, given that I was going through these things. So to conclude, I'd just like to wish everybody good luck. I put a picture, I think, of one of my first days in the lectureship position with some far smarter people than I am, just starting their postdoctoral journeys, with ambitions of doing great things as well. I think it reminds us that we have a great group within the Clark Society in terms of trying to push research forward and really pushing the boundaries. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for listening and conclude my presentation.